Hey guys, Dantix here, back with some more Dragon's Dogma news. We have a lot of interviews with developers to run through, which cover some interesting and, well, heartbreaking news. We'll cover porn-exclusive vocations, the frame rate, final vocation count, race effects, save files, map density, armor system, stats, body type, impacts, inclinations, and relationships. Oh, let me catch my breath. So, let's get right into it. In a Korean article on thisisgame.com, we have further details. Keep in mind this is translated from Japanese to Korean to English, so there could be inconsistencies. First, when asked about relationships, the dev replied with, "As was the case in part 1, there are fixed male and female NPCs with episodes related to love. If a character you like has an episode like that, you're lucky. If your affinity with these characters exceeds a certain level, your relationship can develop into something more than friends. Additionally, there are events that occur only when such developments occur. These likability related events can also be found in NPCs that cannot be dated. So it seems particular NPCs can be dated, and when your affinity reaches a high enough level, you can sleep with them, as confirmed by the ESRB summary stating that players will roll around in bed kissing NPCs. It's still unclear if you can date your main pawn, but hopefully that's still on the table." When asked about vocations, the dev said, "In the case of player-exclusive vocations, they will be hard to master. We designed them to have the capacity of 2 pawns in a single character. In contrast, there are pawn-exclusive vocations, so you might have fun to build your own party with them. We tried to squeeze the core fun factor of action games into this game. So the hybrid vocations that only the player gets access to, the Warfarer, the Magic Archer, the Mystic Spearhand, and the Trickster, are hard to play and master, usually needing a correct team of pawns. However, the interesting thing is that the dev stated there are pawn-exclusive vocations, so vocations we haven't seen before that only a pawn can choose. This is indeed the wording, as it was confirmed by a native Korean speaker called Rapid Silver on Reddit. I really hope this is true, but it might just be the devs not choosing their words correctly or a language barrier. Next, we have an interview with the devs as per rgj.com. Does a character's body type still come with advantages and disadvantages? If I make a huge character, will there be areas I can't get into? The devs replied, "So in Dragon's Dogma 2, you won't have any situations where you won't be able to enter a place because of your body type. However, body types will still have an impact on your character's stats or characteristics. If your character is taller, then there will be characteristics that match that. If your character is shorter, there will be characteristics that match that as well. For example, body type can impact the amount of weight they can carry or how fast their stamina recovers. Also, the length of their limbs affect the speed in which they move or the reach of their attacks. This is exciting. It means that you might make a specific body type for the vocation you want to main. Keep in mind though, it probably won't make a huge difference, and you can always change body types during the game. It's just a little bonus to be aware of." When asked if Dragon's Dogma 2 will have the option for 60 frames per second on consoles, the devs replied, "For Dragon's Dogma 2 will feature uncapped frame rate performance around 30 frames per second or above on consoles. For PC, it will depend on the specs of the machine, but for consoles, we are aiming for an uncapped frame rate around and above 30 frames per second. So the build that many, including IGN, got to play hovered around 30 frames per second on consoles, dipping occasionally. The devs said that that was not the release build, but we can never be sure of that. PC players will have much higher frames depending on their specs, so we don't need to necessarily worry, but it's unclear as of this point. Just stay tuned to this channel for updates before you buy." Next, when asked if picking either a human or bestian character will affect the story, the devs replied with, "So the main storyline is the same for both, whether your main character is human or a bestian. However, some minor details as to how your character proceeds in the game and how others treat your character, those will have differences depending on whether your main character is human or bestian. So expect how some characters respond to you in dialogue to change, maybe commenting on your heritage or the bestian's mistrust of pawns. The story itself, as well as quests, won't change based on your race. Will there be multiple character slots, or are we limited to one character and one save file?" The devs reply, "The game features one save slot. It's one character per player and one main pawn per player. However, the looks and characteristics of both the main player and the main pawn can be modified throughout the game by going to specific locations that allow the option. That being said, based on what we just mentioned about there being minor differences between your selecting your main character as human or bestian and how other characters perceive you, the one thing that you cannot change is the race of your main character. whether your main character is human or bestial. That's one aspect you won't be able to change because that impacts how the characters perceive you. So it's a gameplay choice to lock you into one save file. They don't want you to save before specific areas or specific quests to reload and get the outcome you want. Understandable, given part of the draw of the game is feeling the survival choices and living with the consequences. For example, not saving a little boy in time before he's eaten by wolves. There are a lot of games with big areas but nothing to do, or they just send you out on quests without a story. How have you designed exploration to make it interesting? The devs replied, "First and foremost, we put a lot of emphasis on the density of the map. When it's your first time visiting some place, we try to design it in a way so that you could see the goal where you're going to, but there's no clear path. This is based on the idea that, well, if you're going to a place and you can see the road and it's just a straight road, it's not that exciting to go through the straight route. But if you see where you're going to, but you're not sure how you'll get there, you'll get a bit more excited. Like, okay, how will I get there?" Also, as far as getting to one destination, we prepared multiple routes. We also prepared points of emphasis along the way so you have multiple options, and it would be difficult to experience them all at once. So even though you're visiting the same place, you'll get different experiences and find different things. One of the things we also emphasize is that when you visit in one location, the enemies don't show up the same way, but show up in varied ways so that even though you visit the same location multiple times, it will still provide some value to the player. We have seen and heard this from everyone that's played the game so far, that it feels like there is always something fun and interesting to do. Some followed the golden path, some went off and did random things, but all had a blast doing it. So it seems they aren't blowing smoke with their statements on density. When asked about a new game plus option and the endgame content, the devs didn't want to spoil it, so they refused to comment. They followed up by saying, "Please look forward to it." The interviewer then asked, "What's your favorite vocation in the game and why?" The devs replied, "Initially the sorcerer was my favorite vocation, but lately I've been enjoying the warfarer. Personally, I really enjoy doing multicasting, which is when multiple characters invoke magic at the same time. You can do this with the sorcerer, and you're able to do that with the mage too, and it makes the spell more powerful if you release it at the same time. However, if you get a party of 4 sorcerers, then healing becomes quite a headache. It can actually be pretty challenging. But if you make your party with a wayfarer plus sorcerers, then you could do healing while also multicasting. I find the idea to actually be quite fun and exciting. But yeah, if you put together a party like that, wolves and hobgoblins will wipe out your party. It's really strong against bosses though. It's actually interesting how pawn and arisen combinations all have different effects of what you can and can't do. In the case of multicasting, we've seen this before with the meteor type spell. The devs mentioned that it's harder against wolves and hobgoblins though, as I'm guessing it's because the enemies have the numbers and are fast and relentless, not letting you sit back and cast spells on them. You need someone distracting them rather than having 4 people casting a huge spell on one of the 10. Speaking of 10, I have some bad news. When asked if the 10 vocations revealed are all we're getting, the devs replied, "So currently we have 10 vocations announced, and that's as much as we currently have plans for at this point right now." This might be a bit of copium or a language barrier thing, but he mentioned 10 vocations announced rather than developed. Perhaps they only plan on announcing 10? Look, I really hope so, but it seems more likely we're only getting 10 at this given time, at least based on an article by Eurogamer, where he states, he also told me that, unlike many fans seem to have assumed, the vocations shown off so far are indeed the full amount that will be available in the base game. There's 10 vocations in the game, the 10 out there that we've made public. Because I was expecting more, this hurts, but if I look at it logically, 10 is pretty good considering the depth of each. When talking about the simplified armor system, the devs said, "So for Dragon's Dogma 2, we have changed the armor system and simplified it with the goal that people choose different things to have more visual variety. We wanted to balance it in a way so people wouldn't end up always choosing the same things. In that regard, we added more variety and simplified the system. Rather than having an inner and outer, we divide the equipment for an upper half of the body and a lower half of the body. We want to add helms and capes. There are some presets, but overall, well, something that happened in the previous game at high levels was that people would go for the same kind of equipment in the end. This time we made a conscious goal of trying to create something that even at high levels, people would be encouraged to choose different things. So there would be some visual variety in what people were choosing." He then follows up with, "We tried to make it very consciously so that the higher your level, the more variety would be encouraged to choose from." This is good news. Yes, we can't pick under and over layers, but it's compensated for with more variety in slots. You won't be just seeking the best in slot, you'll have more options, meaning that you'll see even endgame pawns looking different. Well, that's the hope at least. When asked about stat growth and if it functions like it did in Dragon's Dogma 1, the dev said, "So it works in a similar way. it's based on the vocation. However, one of the things that we try to adjust is to make sure it doesn't feel like your stats are capped. We made adjustments in a way that your stats wouldn't get stalled based on your level. However, players won't be able to relocate their stats freely. Now, it's been confirmed by others that stats are tied to your vocation, which makes sense since the Warfarer's downside is lower stats. So if you gain stats based on your current vocation as you level, you just level as another vocation, then switch to the Warfarer and be okay. Stats do shift as you change vocation. When asked, will there be collaborative types of gameplay with other players, the devs replied, there's indirect collaboration with other players. You can do a high five with other players' pawns, for example. Other players' characteristics will also be reflected in pawns, so you'll feel like you're collaborating with them. Personally, I don't like constantly picking up items, so there are specialties or special characteristics that you can assign to pawns, including ones where they pick up items. So those kinds of elements from the creator of the pawn will be reflected on the pawn itself. I don't know about you guys, but I definitely want a pawn on my team that picks up items. We know that inclinations on pawns indicate how they act, and I'm sure there'll be enough that'll be hard to choose between, but saving the hassle of clicking on everything is worth sacrificing an inclination that understands elemental weaknesses on enemies better. Well, to me anyway. When asked about difficulty, the devs replied, it's a pretty hard game compared to the previous one. Usually difficulty is determined by factors such as the time required, the technique required, and the knowledge required. We made a conscious effort to reduce the elements that depended on time required. In terms of the difficulty as an action game, one change that we made is putting in a system that optimizes the difficulty according to the player. We also feel we've successfully added some difficulty that people will enjoy as far as the role-playing elements that require you to play a character within a specific role. I'm not sure how I feel about difficulty changing based on how well or how bad I play. I want to, at one point at least, feel like a god, like I'm getting much stronger. I'm sure that will happen, but I'm glad it's more difficult than the first. So that's everything. What did you think? More or less excited for Dragon's Dogma 2? Let me know below. Like always, if you appreciate the video or you think breathing oxygen is underrated, leave me a like and sub. I'll be bringing a ton of exclusive content very soon. Ciao friends.